She kept his coffee order memorized for 7 years, even after she told herself she had forgotten him completely. He built a company worth millions, and never once let another woman sit across from him at breakfast. One text message, a message neither of them ever sent, was enough to end a love that was supposed to last forever. And on an ordinary morning, in a coffee shop neither of them planned to visit, fate was about to prove that some stories refused to stay finished. If you have ever loved someone so much that losing them felt like losing a piece of your own body, stay with this one until the very end. Because what happened to these two people could happen to anyone. A lie. A silence. A misunderstanding. And 7 years gone, just like that. Her name was Claire. She was gentle in the way people are when life has asked a lot of them and they've decided to stay soft anyway. She worked behind the counter of a small, quiet bookstore tucked between a bakery and a shoe repair shop, in a part of the city most people walked past without noticing. She believed in patience. She believed in second chances, long before she ever needed one for herself. His name was Julian. Back then, he was nobody special, just a tired young man in a wrinkled jacket, standing in the doorway of a bookstore because his mother's birthday was 2 days away and he had absolutely no idea what to buy her. He didn't know that walking through that door would change the rest of his life. Now hold on to that. Hold on to the bookstore, the wrinkled jacket, the birthday gift he never found on his own. Because everything that happens next, the love, the heartbreak, the 7 long years, all of it begins in that one small moment. And by the end of this story, you'll understand that sometimes, the biggest turning points in our lives arrive disguised as something as small as walking into the wrong store looking for the right gift. Let's begin. It was late afternoon when Julian pushed open the door of the bookstore, and the small bell above it rang out, cutting through the hush of the shop like a question no one had asked yet. Claire looked up from the register, expecting another regular, another tired commuter looking for something to read on the train home. Instead, she saw a stranger standing awkwardly near the entrance, glancing at shelf after shelf with the particular helplessness of a man who had wandered into unfamiliar territory. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, walking toward him. "Honestly," Julian said, running a hand through his hair, "I have no idea what I'm doing here. My mother's birthday is in 2 days, and I promised myself this year I'd get her something meaningful instead of another scarf." Claire smiled, the kind of smile that made strangers feel instantly less like strangers. "What does she love?" "Old stories," he said. "The kind with slow beginnings and endings that make you sit in silence for a minute before you can talk again." Claire didn't even hesitate. She walked to a shelf near the back, ran her fingers along the spines, and pulled out a worn, quiet-looking novel with a faded green cover. She placed it in his hands like she was handing him something precious. "This one," she said. "Trust me." He looked at the cover, then at her, then back at the cover. "You're that confident?" "Completely." He bought the book. And just before he left, he turned back at the door, and said the words that Claire would replay in her mind for years afterward, long after everything between them had fallen apart and been rebuilt again. "I think you just saved me from giving my mother the worst birthday gift of her life." She laughed, a real, easy laugh. "You're welcome." That should have been the end of it. A stranger, a book, a small kindness exchanged between two people who would likely never see each other again. But life rarely closes doors that quietly. He came back the following week. He told himself he wanted to tell her that his mother had loved the book, which was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that he had thought about her more times that week than he cared to admit, the way she spoke about stories like they were old friends, the way her eyes lit up when she recommended something she genuinely believed in. He came back the week after that too. And the week after that. Slowly, without either of them officially deciding it, the bookstore became the center of his world. Not because of the books, although he did start reading more than he ever had in his life. He came back because of her. Because of the particular quiet of the shop in the late afternoon, the smell of old paper and fresh coffee from the shop next door, and the sound of Claire's voice when she got excited about a story she loved. Their relationship grew slowly, the way real things tend to grow, without noise, without drama, built on small ordinary moments that meant far more than either of them said out loud. They took long walks after her shifts ended. They talked on the phone until it got embarrassingly late, laughing over nothing, staying on the line simply because neither wanted to be the one to say goodnight first. They shared the kind of conversations people have when they are slowly, carefully, falling in love and trying not to admit it too soon. Julian wasn't wealthy back then. He was building something, a small idea, a business plan scribbled in the margins of notebooks, late nights fueled by instant noodles and stubborn hope. Claire never once asked him for more than he had. She wasn't interested in what he could give her. She was interested in who he was becoming, and she believed in him long before the rest of the world did. One evening, months into their quiet, growing love, Julian took her to a small park near the edge of the city, the same park where, weeks earlier, under a street lamp that flickered like it was nervous for them, they had shared their first kiss. He held both her hands in his, and for a moment, he seemed unsure of how to say what he wanted to say. "I don't have everything figured out yet," he admitted, his voice quieter than usual. Claire smiled at him, the streetlight catching the softness in her eyes. "You don't need to. But I know one thing," he continued, and this time, his voice was steady. "I want you in my future. Whatever that future ends up looking like." Claire felt something settle deep in her chest, the particular, quiet certainty that comes when you realize you have found something rare. "I want that too," she said. They made no grand declarations that night. No promises written in ink, no rings, no plans laid out on paper. Just two people standing in a park, quietly agreeing to build a life together, one ordinary day at a time. If you're new here, this is exactly the kind of story we tell, the kind where ordinary people fall into extraordinary love, and life tests that love in ways they never expected. Stay close, because what happens next is going to break your heart before it puts it back together. For a while, it seemed like nothing could touch what they had built. But life, as it often does, was quietly preparing to test them. It started with a phone call Claire received late one night, her mother's voice, thin and frightened in a way Claire had never heard before. Her mother had collapsed at home. The diagnosis that followed wasn't the kind that resolved itself with rest and time. It was the kind that came with hospital visits, medication schedules, and bills that arrived faster than Claire's small bookstore salary could ever hope to cover. Claire didn't tell Julian everything at first. She didn't want him to see how frightened she was, how helpless she felt watching her mother grow weaker while she counted coins in her savings account, trying to calculate how many more months she could keep up. Desperation has a way of making decisions feel smaller than they actually are. When a recruiter reached out to her about a position in another state, a demanding job, but one with a salary that could actually make a difference for her mother's care, Claire told herself it was simple. Temporary. A means to an end. 6 months, she told herself. Maybe a year. Just enough time to get her mother stable, to pay down what needed to be paid, and then she would come back. She and Julian could survive the distance. Real love survives distance. That's what she told herself, over and over, trying to make the decision feel lighter than it actually was. She hadn't told Julian everything about the job yet. She was waiting for the right moment, the right words, a way to explain it that wouldn't make him feel like she was choosing to leave him. But the night before she was supposed to fly out, that right moment was stolen from her, by someone she never even knew existed. She was packing the last of her things when her phone buzzed. A message from Julian. "I heard you accepted the job. I guess you've already chosen your future." Claire stared at the screen for a long moment, her hands suddenly cold. She read it again, and again, trying to make sense of the words. He had never said anything about the job being a problem. They hadn't even had the full conversation yet. How could he already know? And why did his message sound so distant, so final, as if he had already decided something without her? She called him immediately. The phone rang, and then went to voicemail. She called again. Nothing. She sat on the edge of her half-packed suitcase, staring at her phone, waiting for it to light up with his name, waiting for an explanation that never came. What Claire didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that somewhere else in the city, a man with his own bitterness and his own reasons had been quietly working to tear them apart. Julian's former business partner, a man who had once considered Julian a friend before a falling out over money and control, had learned about Claire's job offer before Julian ever did. And in a moment of calculated cruelty, he had sent Julian a fabricated message, made to look like it came from someone close to Claire, a message claiming she had accepted the job not out of desperation, but because she had met someone else. Someone better. Someone worth leaving Julian for. At almost the exact same time, Julian's supposed friend made sure Claire received her own version of the lie, a message suggesting that Julian had grown tired of waiting, tired of a relationship that demanded patience he no longer had, and that he had already moved on in his heart, if not yet in fact. Neither Claire nor Julian knew the truth. Both of them only knew the pain. And in that pain, both of them made the exact same mistake, the mistake so many people make when love collides with fear and pride. They stopped fighting for each other. Claire left the city early the next morning, her eyes swollen from a night spent crying into a pillow, still gripping her phone every few minutes, hoping, praying, for a message that would explain everything, that would tell her it was all some terrible misunderstanding. It never came. Julian, from his apartment window, watched her car pull away from the curb and disappear down the street, taking with it every quiet plan they had ever made together in that park. He told himself he understood. He told himself she had made her choice, and there was nothing left to say. He didn't know that she was crying just as hard as he was, just a few miles away, believing the exact opposite of what he believed. Years passed. Claire built a life for herself in that new state, a demanding career, a level of financial stability she once could only dream of, and a quiet, carefully maintained distance from anything that reminded her too much of home. She never married. She dated occasionally, politely, without ever letting anyone close enough to matter. Some part of her stayed in that park, under that flickering streetlight, waiting for a version of the story that never happened. Julian, in his own city, poured every ounce of his grief into his work. What had once been a scribbled idea in a notebook grew into a real company, then a successful one, then one that made his name recognizable in rooms he never imagined he'd be invited into. He became wealthy in every sense the world measures. But he never let himself love anyone the way he had loved her. Every time someone came close, he found a reason to pull away, telling himself he simply hadn't found the right person, never admitting, even to himself, that he had already found her, and lost her, and didn't believe lightning struck twice. Sometimes, people can continue living, building, achieving, succeeding, without ever truly moving on from the person they lost. That was Claire and Julian's secret, carried quietly for 7 years, hidden beneath careers and routines and the practiced calm of two people who had convinced everyone around them that they were completely fine. 7 years is a long time. Long enough for a city to change its skyline. Long enough for old wounds to scar over, even if they never fully heal. Long enough for two people to believe they had made peace with a love that ended before it should have. But 7 years was not long enough to erase Julian's voice from Claire's memory. And it was not long enough to stop Julian, late at night, from wondering what might have happened if he had simply picked up the phone one more time. Neither of them knew that fate was already rearranging the pieces of their story. Neither of them knew that a business conference, a familiar city, and a small coffee shop were about to bring them face to face again, and that the truth they never got to hear 7 years ago was finally about to catch up with them both. 7 years of silence were about to end over a cup of coffee neither of them expected to share. She thought she had buried this feeling. He thought he had trained his heart to stop reacting to it. Both of them were about to find out how wrong they were. If you listened to part 1, you already know what a single lie cost these two people. Now watch what happens when the truth finally starts clawing its way back to the surface, because nothing about this reunion is going to be simple, and nothing about what they discover is going to be easy to hear. Claire hadn't planned on going back to that part of the city. Her business conference had been scheduled at a hotel across town, in a district full of glass towers and hurried strangers who all seemed to be somewhere more important. She could have stayed near the hotel. She could have ordered coffee from the lobby cafe like everyone else on her team. But something in her, something she didn't examine too closely, made her ask the hotel concierge for directions to a quiet little coffee shop a few streets away, one she remembered from years ago, back when this city still felt like home instead of a place she used to know. She told herself it was nostalgia. Just nostalgia. Nothing more. The morning air was cool as she walked, her heels clicking steadily against the pavement, her mind already rehearsing the presentation she would give in a few hours. She had built a life around control, controlling her schedule, her career, her emotions. Coming back to this city, even briefly, made her feel that control loosening slightly at the edges, though she refused to admit why. The coffee shop looked almost exactly as she remembered it. The same worn wooden sign above the door. The same soft chime when she pushed it open. The same smell of roasted beans and something faintly like cinnamon. For a moment, standing in the doorway, Claire felt 7 years younger, like she might turn around and see herself as she used to be, hopeful, unafraid, still believing in someone. She ordered her usual drink without even glancing at the menu. Some habits, apparently, survive everything. She was waiting near the counter, eyes fixed on her phone, scrolling through nothing in particular, when a voice behind her stopped her cold. "Still drinking that? Let's continue." 2 words. That was all it took. Claire's entire body went still. Her fingers froze around her phone. For a moment, she genuinely believed she had imagined it, that 7 years of quiet longing had finally conjured his voice out of thin air, the way exhaustion sometimes plays tricks on the mind. But then she heard him breathe, heard the faint shift of his weight as he stepped slightly closer, and she understood, with a jolt that ran straight through her chest, that this was real. Slowly, she turned around. Julian stood there, hands in the pockets of a coat that fit him the way expensive things fit people who have grown into their success. He looked older, yes, a little more weight to his shoulders, a few more lines near his eyes, but there was also something sharper about him now, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there 7 years ago. And yet, despite everything time had changed about him, his eyes were exactly the same. The same eyes that used to look at her like she was the only person in a crowded room. For several long seconds, neither of them said anything. The coffee shop noise seemed to fade into the background, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of other conversations, all of it dimming until there was only the two of them, standing in the wreckage of 7 unspoken years. "Julian," she finally whispered, his name feeling strange and familiar all at once on her tongue. He offered a small, sad smile. "I didn't know you were coming back." "Neither did I," she admitted. "Not really. I just ended up here." There was a pause, the kind of pause filled with everything two people want to say and don't know how to begin saying. Finally, almost as if neither of them could bear to end the conversation so soon after it had started, Julian gestured toward an empty table near the window. "Do you have a few minutes?" Claire glanced at her watch, then at him, then made a decision that would quietly undo the careful control she had built over 7 years. "I have a few minutes." They sat across from each other at a small table, coffee cooling between them, both of them acutely aware of how strange it felt to be in each other's presence again after so long. At first, the conversation stayed safely on the surface: careers, cities, the changes time had brought. Claire told him, briefly, about her mother's recovery years ago, about the demanding job that had eventually turned into a career she was proud of. Julian told her, with visible discomfort at his own success, about the company he had built from almost nothing. But surface conversations rarely stay on the surface for long when there is this much left unsaid beneath them. It was Claire who finally asked the question that had haunted her for 7 years, the question she had asked herself in quiet moments, in empty apartments, in the space between sleep and waking, more times than she could count. Why did you let me go? Julian's expression shifted, confusion flickering across his features. What do you mean? You left. You took the job. I know I left, Claire said, her voice tightening. But I never got the chance to explain why. You sent me that message the night before I left. You told me you knew I'd already chosen my future. I tried calling you. You never answered. Julian went very still. What message? Something cold moved through Claire's chest. The one where you said you'd heard I accepted the job, and that I'd already made my choice. Claire, I never sent you a message like that. His voice had dropped, quiet and careful, the way people speak when they sense the ground shifting beneath them. I thought you left because you'd met someone else. Someone told me you'd taken the job because there was another man in the picture. I thought, he stopped, shaking his head slowly. I thought you didn't want to explain it to me because you didn't know how to. Claire stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he was saying. That's not true. I never said anything like that to anyone. Who told you that? Julian reached into his coat pocket, pulling out his phone with hands that weren't quite steady. He scrolled for a moment, then turned the screen toward her, showing her an old message thread, one he had clearly kept, buried in his phone for 7 years, unable to delete it and unable to stop looking at it. Claire read the message slowly. Then she read it again. Her hands had begun to tremble. I never sent this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian, I never wrote this. This isn't even how I talk. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything either of them had experienced in the 7 years since they'd parted. Slowly, painfully, the pieces began falling into place between them, a puzzle neither of them had known they were missing. Someone sent me a message pretending to be you, Julian said slowly, almost to himself, as though saying it aloud might help him believe it. And someone sent you a message pretending to be me. Claire felt her stomach drop. Someone lied to both of us. 7 years, Julian said, and for the first time, Claire heard something break slightly in his voice, a crack in the composed, successful man sitting across from her, revealing the heartbroken young man he had been the night he watched her car disappear down the street. 7 years, Claire, because of a lie someone told us. Claire felt tears rising before she could stop them, hot and sudden. I thought you stopped loving me, she said, her voice cracking. I thought you decided I wasn't worth waiting for. I built my entire life around that belief. Every relationship I avoided, every time I told myself I was fine being alone, all of it, because I thought you let me go without a fight. Julian reached across the table, his hand hovering for a moment before gently covering hers. I never stopped, he said quietly. Not for one single day. I told myself I had, because it hurt too much to admit the truth. But I never actually stopped loving you, Claire. I just stopped believing I had the right to. She covered her face with her free hand, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of 7 wasted years pressing down on her all at once. I waited for you, she admitted, the words coming out broken. Even when I told myself I wasn't. Some stupid part of me was always waiting. So did I, Julian said. God, Claire, so did I. If you're feeling this story in your chest right now, imagine sitting in Claire's seat, imagine discovering that the heartbreak that shaped 7 years of your life was built on a lie someone else told. That kind of revelation doesn't just reopen old wounds. It rewrites everything you believed about your own past. But this story isn't finished unraveling yet. Because now that Claire and Julian know they were lied to, the real question begins, who did this to them, and why? And more importantly, is knowing the truth enough to undo 7 years of separate lives, separate identities, separate versions of themselves built entirely around the absence of the other person. They sat in that coffee shop for nearly 2 hours, long after their drinks had gone cold, slowly untangling the truth neither of them had ever had access to. Claire explained, for the first time, the full weight of what had driven her to leave: her mother's illness, the mounting bills, the desperate math she had done late at night trying to find any way to help her family survive. Julian listened, his jaw tightening with something between guilt and heartbreak, realizing that the woman he had spent 7 years believing had abandoned him had actually been fighting a battle he never even knew existed. "I should have come after you," he said quietly. "I should have shown up at your door and demanded an explanation instead of just believing a text message. And I should have called you 100 more times instead of assuming your silence meant you didn't care," Claire replied. "We both made the same mistake. We let fear make our decisions for us." Julian was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the table, at their hands still loosely intertwined. "Do you know who could have done this? Who would have wanted to hurt us both this badly?" Claire shook her head slowly. But Julian's mind was already turning backward, sifting through old memories, old business dealings, people who had once been close to him before ambition and money had poisoned those relationships. There was one name that surfaced, uninvited, a memory of a falling out over control of the company he had built, a man who had once called himself Julian's friend before jealousy curdled into something far darker. He didn't say the name out loud. Not yet. Some truths, he realized, needed to be confirmed before they could be spoken. "It doesn't matter right now who did this," Claire said softly, noticing the tension building in his expression. "What matters is that we finally know the truth. What we do with that truth, that's the only thing we actually have control over." Julian looked at her, something shifting behind his eyes, not just grief for the years they'd lost, but the faintest, most fragile flicker of hope for what might still be possible. "Claire," he said carefully, "I know this is complicated. I know we're not the same people we were 7 years ago. But I don't want to walk away from this table and go back to pretending I don't think about you every single day." Claire's breath caught. 7 years of carefully built walls, 7 years of convincing herself she had moved on, 7 years of telling everyone, including herself, that she was completely fine, all of it trembled under the weight of that one honest sentence. "I don't want to walk away either," she admitted. But even as she said it, a quiet uncertainty settled over both of them. They weren't the same two young people who had once promised forever in a park under a flickering street lamp. 7 years had changed them, hardened parts of them, healed other parts, built entirely separate lives in separate cities with separate routines that didn't include each other. Truth, they were both beginning to realize, was only the first step. Rebuilding what had been broken would require something far more difficult than simply knowing what had gone wrong. As Claire finally glanced at her watch and realized, with a jolt, that her conference session was starting in 15 minutes, she stood up reluctantly, torn between the demands of the life she had built and the fragile, unexpected door that had just reopened in front of her. "I have to go," she said. "But Julian..." "I know," he said, standing as well. "This isn't over. Not this time." She hesitated at the door, looking back at him one last time before stepping outside into the busy morning street. And as she walked toward her hotel, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with her upcoming presentation, one thought settled over her with quiet, terrifying clarity: they finally knew the truth. But now came the hardest part of all, deciding whether they were brave enough to risk everything for a second chance, knowing exactly how deeply the first one had cost them. Because somewhere in this city, the person who destroyed their love the first time was still out there. And Julian was about to make a decision that would either protect this fragile second chance, or put it in danger all over again. If you've made it this far, you already know this story isn't just about lost love. It's about the courage it takes to trust again after being betrayed by a lie you never saw coming. And in part 3, you're going to see exactly how far Claire and Julian are willing to go to make sure nothing, and no one, steals their story from them a second time. Stay close.